live streamed.
Okay. Ready?
Mhm.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Broadcasting to you here from YouTube. My name's Joe, and I am part of the Heartwood Refuge Sangha, and we are going to have a Dharma talk today. I'm presenting the Dharma talk. We have a snowy day here in Western North Carolina, so we're all hunkered down inside and we're broadcasting virtually. So welcome. This is my second Dharma talk to the Sangha. The first time I kind of gave a bit of my history and some of the history of how I've seen the Dharma and the Buddhist teachings over the last 3.5 years that I've kind of been attending Heartwood and participating in programs there. And so we did kind of a broad brush of my experience and kind of what floated to the top for me. And we had a little bit of fun with things like the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and saying, man, without a little more information, we wouldn't really know what to do. So I was looking back at those notes in preparation for this talk, and I said, I haven't spent a lot of time really looking into the Buddhist words on these topics. And so, one of the pages of my notes from last time was, just the bullets of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, what each element of the path was. And I said, it'd be great for me to go in and see what the Buddha said about these things. And so I thought that might be the focus of our talk here today. So that's what I've prepared. So we'll start first with the Four Noble Truths. And I've pulled some of the Buddha's actual words that describe these Four Noble Truths. And we'll review that. I've got a couple of suttas. I was kind of looking for gems. I found a couple of suttas that seemed to lead us along to how the Buddha taught the path and how he stressed certain aspects to his folks. And then we'll go ultimately into the Eightfold Path and look at the components of that and see how some of that strikes us. So to start off, we have the Four Noble Truths. And if you're not familiar with the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, they are the truth of suffering. And in the suttas, you'll see different translations, and sometimes they'll use the word stress as a translation of what the Buddha said. So suffering is a common translation, as well as stress. So those two words can be kind of used interchangeably. But there's the truth of suffering, there's the truth of the origin of suffering, there's the truth of the end of suffering, and there's the truth of the path that leads to the end of suffering. And I said, man, without a little more information, not sure what to do with all that, the last time we spoke. But, fortunately, the Buddha had roughly, 45 years to teach. And so there's just a huge volume of the teachings that have been recorded down through the years and come to us now. So lots of different ways that he talked about these things to different audiences and different people that he spoke to. So I thought we'd take a look at each of these before we move on to the Eightfold Path, and just take a look at each of these and what he said about them. So I'm working from the Samyutta Nikaya. It's one of the collections of the Pali canon, the various scriptures or records of the Buddha's words and his discussions. And here he says, the truth of suffering, birth, aging, illness, and death are suffering. Union with what is displeasing is suffering. Separation from what is pleasing is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In brief, clinging to the experiences generated by the five aggregates. Now, see, we got terminology, and we were joking about that last time we talked, right? All these different terminologies for me to catch up with when I got started a few years ago. But the five aggregates, to remind us, are the way the Buddha described how perception works. Generally speaking, how perception works for us, that, there's form, kind of the material world. There's our consciousness of objects in that world that come to us through our senses. There's our perception of those objects. What is that? Is it a glass? There's the feeling that object generates. I like that. I don't like that. I like the color. I don't like the color. Those kinds of things. There's the mental formations, and we start to kind of move into our conditioning, our memory, and generally speaking, leading to our response to this object. So in brief, clinging to the experiences generated by those five aggregates is suffering, the Buddha says. I was on a website and looking up the five aggregates, and I made a couple of quotes. This is from a website called Universal Buddhism. It says the five aggregates work together as a continuous stream to provide a personal experience. The process, though, is in constant flux, and the components are perpetually changing and are only valid for a brief period. So to me, this shows that, the five aggregates are not an absolute source of truth in terms of how we see and evaluate the world. That each of the aggregates can be tricked into generating a false perception or an otherwise conditioned response. So we can see how we can see things kind of that really aren't there. We can see things in ways that maybe aren't correct. There's some great examples of that. We'll get to a little bit of that later on. But I thought that was interesting about the five aggregates, just as an aside, since it was mentioned in how the Buddha described the truth of suffering. And then we have the origin of suffering. And in here, the Buddha says, it's this craving that leads to renewed existence, accompanied by delight, lust, seeking delight here and there. That is craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, craving for extermination. All these are the origin of suffering, or what lead us to suffer, or lead us into stress, is another way to say it. And then the truth of the end of suffering. This is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving, the giving up and relinquishing of it, the freedom from it, and non-reliance on it. And then, of course, the fourth noble truth, the path that leads to the end of suffering, the Eightfold Path. We're going to spend some time on that, really for the bulk of this talk. So there are a few quotes from the Buddha that I thought were useful to mention, and I'll read directly from these. These are very brief suttas. The first one is called Implications, and it's kind of implications in an exhortation to practice. So the implications of the Four Noble Truths, his exhortation to his students to practice. He says that the noble truth of suffering, such has been made known by me. Oh, this is the noble truth of suffering, such has been made known by me. In this statement, this is the noble truth of suffering. There are innumerable nuances, innumerable details, innumerable implications. And then he continues to say that for the origin of suffering, as well as the end of suffering, and the way leading to the end of suffering. So he says then, therefore, bhikkhus, an exertion should be made to understand this is suffering. An exertion should be made to understand this is the origin of suffering. An exertion should be made to understand this is the end of suffering. and exertion should be made to understand. This is the way leading to the end of suffering. So what he gave us is not the answer. It's a clue, but we have to make effort to really discover for ourselves the truth of what he's teaching. So he's exhorting us to that practice and to really seek out an understanding of what he's saying. And then another one called Ignorance. He was meeting with some folks, and one of them asked, "Venerable Sir, it is said, ignorance, ignorance. What is ignorance, sir? And in what way is one immersed in ignorance?" And the Buddha responds, "Bhikkhu, not knowing suffering, not knowing the origin of suffering, not knowing the end of suffering, and not knowing the way leading to the end of suffering, this is called ignorance, Bhikkhu. And it is in this way that one is immersed in ignorance." So to me, that's, as I've pursued this path and come to some understanding of how to practice, and as it's started to change the way that I see the world and to see myself, I see a lot of the ways that, we're ignorant of the way things really are. And I look back on the past. One of my practices is to contemplate, karma, karmic retribution, the karmic conditions of my life, and looking back and realizing there was so many ways that I acted in the past that just were not beneficial. Maybe we're not wholesome. We're not useful. And so, without some understanding, we tend to just feel guilty about these things. And we carry these things around, and we say sometimes, for some of these things, we say, "I wish I never did that." And we keep kind of rattling this stuff around in our brain, and it just stays there. And we have these regrets and that sort of thing. But now I'm starting to look back and realize, wait, I did a lot of that stuff just out of ignorance, just out of craving, just after this, after that, looking after some kind of happiness, looking to distract myself from whatever was at hand. And so it's not that we're completely blameless, because, Panyawati says, as soon as we perform, an action or open our mouths to speak, the karma is generated. It's already there. It polarizes with the action. So it's not like there's not some karma generated from, past actions, but still we can look back and say, well, I was a little more ignorant then than I hope I am now. And if I know better now, then maybe that means I won't repeat the same mistakes. And so that's good news. So I thought that was a interesting one. As I ran into it, I said, you know what, I'm going to mention that one. So hopefully that's useful. On Thursday, we have a Dharma contemplation group that meets every Thursday. If you haven't attended, there's a virtual meeting. You can go to our website, heartwoodrefuge.org, and register, and you'll be able to attend a Zoom meeting where we contemplate a certain text from Buddhism, usually not a whole text, a sutta, usually a couple paragraphs long. And, some of this stuff can be pretty cryptic, the way it's translated from its original language and that sort of thing. And we get together and we talk about, we read it and then we talk about it. And this is one that we used on Thursday. It was really one of the things that inspired me to focus on this week, this topic, generally speaking. It's called The Middle Way. And it's from a sutta that's specifically called Setting the Motion of the Wheel of Dharma. It's out of the Samyutta Nikaya, number 56. It says, "Thus I have heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was dwelling at Varanasi in Deer Park at Isipatana. There the Blessed One addressed his students of the group of 5 this way: Bhikkhus, these 2 extremes should not be followed by one who has gone forth into homelessness." So these are monks, and so he's talking to them that way. Otherwise, I've seen another translation of this where someone just says, these two extremes should not be followed by one who has gone forth. So let's say that as lay people, we've gone forth. Those of us that are lay people have gone forth into the pursuit and the practice of these teachings. And so that would include us here then. So these two extremes should not be followed by one who has gone forth. What two? The pursuit of sensual happiness in sensual pleasures, which is low, vulgar, the way of worldlings, ignoble, unbeneficial, and also the pursuit of self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble, unbeneficial. That guilt I mentioned earlier could be counted across, according to that, right? Self-mortification, the ways we kind of beat ourselves up. Without veering towards either of these extremes, the Tathagata has awakened to the middle way, which gives rise to vision, which gives rise to knowledge, which gives rise to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. What bhikkhus is that middle way awakened by the Tathagata, which gives rise to vision, which leads to nibbana? It is this noble Eightfold Path, that is, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. This, bhikkhus, is that middle way awakened to by the Tathagata, which is the way that the Buddha refers to himself and other enlightened beings. This gives rise to vision, gives rise to knowledge, leads to peace, leads to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, and to nibbana. So this is the middle way. This is the path of the middle way. And the Eightfold Path is, okay, if I'm interested in the middle way, if I believe and I'm intrigued by the Four Noble Truths and how to really get at that for myself. And I like the idea of the middle way and kind of avoiding extremes with how we approach the different things that arise in our lives. Then there's this path called the Eightfold Path. So many of the specific notes that I used to get at, what are the various components of the Eightfold Path came from a website called becomingbuddha.com. And at the top of the page where they went through and sort of outlined the Eightfold Path and the meaning of, how the Buddha talked about it in kind of bullet form, which was handy for me, making up these notes. At the top, they said, the purpose of practicing the Eightfold Path is to experience the cessation of the distraction of stress. And in parentheses, I put suffering because those words tend to be used interchangeably. Stress describes the ongoing mental, physical states experienced by your ego self in the phenomenal world. Stress ranges in experience from general unsatisfactoriness and disappointment to extreme emotional and physical suffering. In general, the Eightfold Path is made up of 8 elements, and they're described by the Buddha. And they also break down into 3 categories of Buddhist practice. Those categories are the development of wisdom, the development of virtue, and the development of unwavering concentration, also called meditation in many of the translations. So getting into the Eightfold Path, we heard the 8 things that make it up, and I made the joke last time I gave a talk that if I just read off those 8 elements of the path, right view, right effort, right mindfulness, we can really start some fights in this world, right? Because so much of what we encounter in the world is who's right, who's wrong, what's black, what's white. And, on the news, all we hear is, people trying to point out who's right, who's wrong, who made some kind of a mistake. And so, if you're just left with right effort, right view, well, what is the right view? Who's got the right view, right? We all want to own it. And it's really not like that. That this is a path that is kind of self-realized, that we have to learn the meaning of these things for ourselves with some guidance. And if you've been exposed to the Pali Canon and the books associated with the recording of the Buddha's words that have come down through the years, there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of these texts. So there's no shortage of teachings in and around all of these themes throughout the path to help people understand how to walk the path. But the truth is, we have to walk the path. So the Buddha attained this enlightenment and shared this information, but he couldn't make us enlightened. All he could do was point the way. And Panyawadi points that out to us all the time. This is really up to us. And so, as we get into this, kind of keep that in mind, that there's, as the Sutta said earlier here, that there are innumerable nuances and levels and layers to this. And so we should keep that in mind as we're going in. I remember when I kind of first went to Heartwood and attended a talk by either Panyawadi or Panyadipa, I'm not sure which at that time. But I remember realizing that, it made a lot of sense. It seemed really helpful, but I also heard, a lot of things that I wasn't familiar with. And so, but simply with the desire to, hey, this seems like there's something here. This seems like there's something here for me. I'm going to make it my business to look into this. And so I started making notes about things that were said, words that were used. The last time I talked, we talked about some of what those words were, emptiness, even the word suffering is something you got to kind of get your head around for yourself. What does it mean to me and how can I work with it? But there is that opportunity. So as we go through this, just realize that, again, as the Buddha said, there are nuances to this and it's a path. And as we get into it, we begin to teach ourselves what this all means and what it all means to us. To me, that's encouraging. Hopefully it is to you. So the first, under development of wisdom, we have right view and right intention. And the Buddha said that with regard to right view, that it was knowledge with regard to stress. It was knowledge of kind of that, the truth of suffering. It was knowledge with regard to the origin of suffering. It was knowledge with regard to the cessation of that suffering. And it was knowledge with regard to the way of practice leading to the cessation of suffering. Well, that doesn't give us a lot to work with, but in the last few years, I've come to realize, that so much of our stress or our own individual suffering comes from the impermanence, the lack of stability. We talked about those aggregates and how, they turn on and turn off, that our experiences in the world are extremely fleeting, that we have memory and we have this way of formulating our opinions and our views of things, and we have our ways of making things permanent through those faculties, but that things really aren't as permanent as we'd like them to be. And so that a lot of our stress and suffering comes from the fact that we're relying on things to stay the same, and they just don't. And in Buddhism, that's called impermanence. So one of my thoughts here is just so much of our stress or suffering comes from the impermanence of whatever thoughts, circumstances, or phenomena we experience and cling to in this life. Not to mention the ever-present fact that we're going to die, right? And none of the things that we kind of, experience in this life, touch and hold on to, and none of that goes with us when we go, right? It all stays here. So I'm beginning to notice how people seem to completely ignore this impermanence and get caught up in all sorts of debates and activities that really again, they can't take with them, aren't really going to benefit them much in this life, or even, in whatever's next. We can't take any of this with us. That's a theme that's been really rising up for me. We can't take any of this with us. This experience in this world is about learning how to be, our best, truest, authentic selves, in my opinion. That's the work. The purpose of this world, it's created and provides a great laboratory for doing all of that. But I believe that when this life is over, it all stays here. There's a saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, what happens on Earth stays on Earth, except for the impressions that are left. Maybe good impressions, bad impressions. I think generally speaking, that's called karma. So it just occurs to me that, so many of the details of this life, the people, the places, the things, circumstances, debates, beliefs, positions we hold, this is all going to completely fade when we die. Like what happens when we awake from a dream and sleep, when we're sleeping and we dream, or when we leave a play at a theater. So many of the details, fade almost as soon as I wake up from a dream. I'll say I had great dreams last night. So I'll say, oh, what were they? My wife is Susan. And I'll say, I don't remember. And that could be literally, within 30 seconds after I woke up. So I felt like I was having a great dream, but having woken into now, my normal waking consciousness, I don't remember the details. I don't remember the circumstances. I don't remember who was in it. I just know it felt like a good dream. So there's this residual feeling I have that it was a good dream. It was not a bad dream, but I have no recollection of the details. They faded almost immediately as soon as I woke up. Same as if we go to a play. We're sitting in the audience. We're sitting there. We're immersed in the scene. They have various ways of creating, a bedroom on the stage or various settings. We see all the details that go into that, all the different furniture that's there, the colors that they use, creativity that seems to have gone into creating the set and creating the impression of what it is they're trying to have us believe, really, as we get immersed in this drama. And, isn't it true that as soon as we leave the theater, so many of those details fade very quickly? And then what we're left with is kind of what tension there was in that drama, what resolutions, made us, feel comfortable or relieved. We're left with this kind of residual effect of the drama that we experienced, but many of the details start to fade fast. We may remember a face of one of the characters that we really liked, or that we really, were attracted to, or that represented kind of, some form of tension. But other than that, all those details about the set and all that other stuff kind of fade. And so that's been a theme for me, just seeing that and seeing examples of that for myself, and how, man, be careful what we pay attention to in this life, because we don't get to take any of this with us. And as soon as we're at the end of this life, so many of these details, all of this, CNN News, Fox News, all of it is going to just fade into nothingness, because it all belongs here. So that all, to me, is kind of where I'm at, I guess, with the view. Some other thoughts, what can we really see anyways? Our senses, those aggregates, the way they build up how we perceive the world, are extremely fallible. They're purpose built. Every creature has different ways of seeing. Some can see colors, some can't see colors. Some can see wider spectrums of light. Others can't. So each creature, including humans, have just enough in terms of how their senses operate and how their faculties for perceiving and reacting to the world allow them to be. It's usually just enough for what they need to do, how they need to get food, how they need to build shelter and have shelter, and generally have their being. There's a great example. I was reading a book about birds. I feed the birds every day out in the back, and there's quite a population that's developed out there. They all come every day and look for the food. And so I was reading a book about the birds, and somebody wrote a book about what's it like to be a bird. And so I thought that was interesting. And I read this example of a hawk, and it talked about how something like a hawk sees, and how its visual processing needs to be really fast, like so fast, because they are approaching prey that is trying to escape them. Think of a mouse, darting around on the ground. They're flying in at some, tens of miles an hour, right? This bird has come screaming in and trying to catch this mouse that it saw, and the mouse is trying to evade it. So as it's coming in at those high speeds, its vision needs to not only work, but be processed very quickly so it can react or try to react. And so the example used, and I thought this was fascinating, was that if a hawk was to look at one of our movies, which is, a series of frames at about 30 frames per second going by, our eyes are fooled into thinking this is a movie, that this is a moving scene. But a hawk's eyes would see that as a slideshow. He would see that as a slideshow. It would not be a movie to him at all. So he wouldn't be fooled by it, but we are. So you see how fallible our faculties for perceiving the world are. So there's a lot of talk about this world as an illusion, and so much of what we experience in this world is illusory. And when I read things like that and I kind of put it together with my own experience, I start to kind of see the truth in it. That don't believe everything you see, don't believe everything you hear, because a lot of it we interpret through our conditioning. So moving on, the next under development of wisdom is right intention, and this is, according to the Buddha, being mindful of the intention to recognize and abandon wrong views. I will say that there's a book, one of the other inspirations I had this week. There's a book that I picked up at Heartwood many years ago, a few years ago. There was, I think, a retreat, and whoever was leading the retreat, one of the venerables had delivered some of these books, and they were being offered one day when we were there for Sunday Dharma, and I grabbed a couple. Now, of course, these are early days, and I didn't look at the book all this time, and so I was preparing for Dharma Contemplation last week, and my wife and I were kind of talking about it. She ran into the office and picked up this book on the bookshelf, and found some examples that we could use for the Dharma Contemplation. And when I looked at this book, I realized it's called On the Path. This entire book, this 500 pages, this entire book is about the Eightfold Path. And back to the point of, right view, of all of the different, 8 elements in the path, right view has the biggest. It has 100 pages. So right view, and all the examples of suttas and descriptions that they put together for the different ways to sort of utilize right view and practice that are 100 pages out of a 500-page book. So that gives you a sense of the importance of right view, and how as I'm kind of going along on this path, my view is constantly being adjusted, and it's really just a matter of allowing that to happen, and allowing yourself to be wrong, dead wrong about certain things that you thought you saw, that you thought you knew. So right intention, right? Pointing us back to abandoning wrong views. What's a wrong view? Get started, and then you learn as you go, and they become apparent to you kind of as you go. Being mindful of the intention to remain free from ill will. Being mindful of the intention to remain harmless to all beings. And that last one, harmless to all beings, we take a little further, folks that practice on the Bodhisattva path, we take that last intention even further to not only not harm, but to literally save living beings, and to be a force, in the world or in the universe as an aspiration, to literally be able to sort of, help living beings come out of this suffering, something that, the Buddha himself was trying to do for the 45 years that he taught us. So far we have right view and right intention, and that is all under the development of wisdom. And now we have the development of virtue. And the first element there is right speech. We have the precepts that we mentioned last time. Precepts are more or less kind of vows or promises that we make to ourselves to try to arrive at some form of wholesomeness for ourselves, to not stray into unwholesome activities and activities that kind of don't serve us and don't serve others. And so, under right speech, we have abstaining from lying, abstaining from divisive speech, abstaining from abusive speech, abstaining from gossip, abstaining from idle chatter. Not just because they're not good ideas or that they're wrong or that by doing them we're sinning, which is kind of how a lot of us kind of, came up, spiritually in our lives, with this idea that, when you do these things, you're sinning. But because they're just not useful. They're not useful. They're not useful to us. If I tell somebody a lie, now I've got to worry about, are they going to find out that I lied to them? I'm carrying this around now. It's baggage. So if we do a lot of that, man, it's a lot to keep track of in life. But if I do less of it, then I'm free. And so it's about freedom. This path is really about freedom. But for me, for many years, and even in my 20s, when I took up yoga, practiced meditation, it was really, really clear to me, and it was emphasized in the teachings we had then, words are extremely powerful. Most of us are not nearly mindfulness of the power of words, how they impact others. Just trying to get at, what mental impressions do our words create? Do we speak to uplift others or to cause them stress, or try to coerce them into seeing our view, or to get them to act in a certain way? Do we speak hoping that they'll see how clever we are, right? Getting attention for ourselves. Are our words, a form of punishment, particularly when used in front of others? And this can tie back to right intention. So you see how these different elements of the path, tie back to one another. Ties back to right intention. If we're really trying to hurt somebody with our words, then that goes back to our intentions. Are we trying to harm them? Or do we have some kind of ill will that we're exercising against them? So then, still under virtue, we have right action, abstaining from taking life. And in Buddhism, that goes further than just killing humans. That goes into, all creatures. So I mentioned last time how I've taken to, carrying insects out of the house, not to unnecessarily harm life. Abstaining from taking what is not freely given. Abstaining from sexual misconduct. There are many levels, as we begin to work with these ideas, of these things, the many levels. And that's why the Buddha stressed that there are nuances, there are innumerable nuances, there are innumerable ways that these can be understood, that these truths can be understood. And it really is a lifetime of really trying to get at this stuff, right? So, but there are levels, right? So, for example, speaking is an action. We can take from one another with our words. So we have taking what is not freely given. So we can make people feel sorry for us. We've taken something from them. We've obligated them in some way. We could speak in such a way as to take someone's self-esteem, to create doubt in their minds. All of that is taking what is not freely given. So next we have, still under virtue, right livelihood. Right livelihood abandons dishonest livelihood. So let's say we're in a gang, or we're making, we're a bookie, we're making book, and we're a drug dealer, and we're ensnaring others, to benefit ourselves. Those would all be, I guess, easy examples of dishonest or wrong livelihood. And right livelihood is honest livelihood, is the second thing that's said. And as I looked at that, I said, well, and then it seems like it would also include dishonest work. It would include both dishonest work as well as dishonesty at work, right? So we can be at work in some kind of legitimate, good, honest employment, but we can just be dishonest about our what we do there and how we are, whether we're forthright with what we're doing, how we're doing it, and those sorts of things. So now we go into the section on concentration. So the third of those three kind of pillars of Buddhist practice and the Eightfold Path is concentration, the development of unwavering concentration. And I remember hearing this from Panyadipa many times, I'm sure Panyawadi as well. And I apologize, I'm going to read these, and I apologize if they're difficult to keep track of as I read them, because I find them to be somewhat nuanced myself. But right effort is the first of the elements of under concentration, right effort, making the right effort. So it's developing the desire and having the ongoing persistence or diligence to avoid unwholesome qualities that are not present. So I guess an example of that would go back to what we talked about with livelihood. So unwholesome qualities that are not present. If I'm thinking about, if I'm not a drug dealer, and I'm thinking about becoming a drug dealer, that would be an unwholesome quality that is not currently present, right? So it's developing the desire and the ongoing diligence to avoid getting ourselves into unwholesome actions, speech, or otherwise. So it's before they become part of us. It's kind of heading them off and being able to see them before they become something that we do or something that we say. And then second one, developing the desire and ongoing persistence to abandon unwholesome qualities that are present. So we've got unwholesome qualities that we know are there, or that we come to learn to identify. And that's what this path is about. When we start out, we say, well, nothing's wrong. And then as we start to kind of hear the teachings, we go, yeah, I am pretty anxious at work when certain things come up. That is a form of suffering. I'd like to be done with that. And so we start to look for ways to sort of notice that and say, well, how could we change it? Maybe it's accepting situations more. Maybe it's not resisting so much, whatever it is. But we have those things that are already part of us as unwholesome qualities. And then the third one is developing the desire and having, and making effort to establish wholesome qualities that are not yet present. And the fourth one, having the desire and making effort to end confusion and increase the full development of wholesome qualities that are present. So one of my thoughts here is, our thoughts, our speech, our actions are, they are really either wholesome or unwholesome, beneficial or not beneficial, skillful or unskillful in terms of what impact they have, in the world, in our environment, with the people we interact with. But in order to change our habits or our tendencies, any of these things that we start to see, we have to make effort and literally cultivate the change. And oftentimes there's certain practices around, reminders, daily reminders. I know someone in the Sangha who mentioned that they've got sticky notes all over, the mirror in the bathroom. So that when they wake up every day, they're reminded of the things they're trying to want to be reminded of every single day before they start the day. So they go into the day with the right attitude, with the right view, and to make sure that they're able to sort of make more effort towards some of the things they actually are trying to change. So making effort to cultivate the change either by abandoning what we find to be or proves to be unwholesome. Sometimes we do things that we don't know are unwholesome, and then maybe we see somebody's reaction to something that we did, and then we realize, oh wow, I didn't realize that impacted them that way. So then so that's proven itself to be unwholesome, and we'd like to change it. So now right mindfulness. Right mindfulness is remaining mindful of the body, free of distraction, ardent, alert, and mindful of abandoning greed and reaction to worldly events. So this mindfulness, those sticky notes are a way of putting in place some of the thoughts that we want to be mindful of throughout the day. So mindfulness is very important to cultivating change in these habitual tendencies that we have that we'd like to change. The second one, right mindfulness, is remaining mindful of feelings arising and passing away, free of distraction. To be mindful of feelings, mindful of abandoning greed and reaction to worldly events. The third one, remaining mindful of mental qualities arising and passing away, being free of distraction. And then the fourth one, remaining mindful of the quality of mind arising and passing away, free of distraction, ardent, alert, mindful, abandoning greed and reaction to worldly events. So this mindfulness is we're watching. And, concentration and meditation, those words are used interchangeably, the way suffering and stress are used interchangeably when we talk about the Four Noble Truths. In this section, under concentration, the third of the three pillars, meditation is also used there. And you can see that, mindfulness is this idea that we're paying attention. Now, we're all aware that our minds are running all the time. We have a constant stream of thoughts in our minds. Certainly, we're aware that we're thinking all the time, right? We call it the internal dialogue. There's this chatter. There's no issue with understanding that our minds are always sort of running. But being mindful of what is coming up and really trying to see, well, what is it? And to look at things in such a way that we notice it, but we don't attach to it. We don't allow it to sort of take us anywhere. We see it. If it's something that comes up that we say, oh, I need to take care of this, then great. Make note of the fact that it needs to be taken care of. Maybe you make a note in your phone. Maybe you write it down. Maybe you just know that you'll get to it. But we don't need to create a whole story around that. We already know we're going to do it. We made a commitment to do it. It's done. Now, back to our mindfulness. What's next? What's going to come up next? So seeing these things and not attached, so letting the moments come and letting the moments go is a big part of the practice. So right mindfulness is another one of those big sections in this book, as you can imagine. All different ways to sort of, get at this. But mindfulness is also a practice that we use in meditation. And that's why meditation is useful. Because when we sit and we're mindful of what's coming up without attaching to it, then eventually we get quiet. And the practice of doing that in a sitting sense is like being in a laboratory. Then when we leave the laboratory and go out into the world, we're going to get caught up in all kinds of things. But we at least have a tool, and every now and then we'll find ourselves getting caught up. We'll know what it feels like because we felt it in meditation when we were sitting on the pillow, and we'll know, oh, just breathe that out. Just breathe it out. Just let it go. Just breathe it out. We know how to do it because we practice doing on the pillow when we meditate. So that's right mindfulness. For me, mindfulness of the body has become very important. My wife is probably chuckling about this because she's been saying stuff like this for years. And we have a Dharma contemplation, like I mentioned, on Thursdays, and part of that is we have the reading, and then we go through a process of getting at, what are the words that stand out to us? And then the second element is getting at the feelings that those words generate in our body. And for all the years that I've been participating in Dharma contemplation, my least favorite is the part where we have to talk about how does it make us feel? What feeling arises in the body from these words? It's the thing I'm least in touch with as a human being. But lately, I guess through the mechanism of this practice and trying to get at some of these things, every now and then we have an insight about something we can do about one of these things that we're trying to work on here, how we can be more mindful. We take that and we go. And all of these things are overlapping, and they kind of, one thing leads to another. And so lo and behold, through my efforts to kind of understand Buddhism and practice it in whatever way I can, I'm beginning to become aware of how important this body is to learning the lessons that we have to learn in this life, and how it's really such an instrument. It can be used literally to detect, it's useful in detecting stress and identifying our feelings. In meditation, there's this feeling of engagement, and I've learned to call it that. It's that, I'm in a fairly peaceful state, and then maybe a mind stream comes up. I may not even be aware of it coming up, but then I become aware of it, and right there I have a choice to either engage this or not. And when I engage it, there's this subtle sort of pull that occurs, and it's kind of difficult to subscribe, but it feels the way like if you were standing on a platform and there was a motor on that platform and that motor started up. You might feel a subtle shift of that platform, like the inertia of the motor was pulling somehow in a way, exerting some kind of force on the platform. So there's this pull or sense of, being pushed by whatever thoughts or feelings are coming up. And I find that that's useful as I'm going out and I'm maybe talking to somebody and I'm at a point where something's arisen that I might say, or I find myself kind of engaging in what's being said and realizing I might get caught up here in a way that maybe I don't really want to. Or if I start to kind of feel that I'm going there, I feel this pull a little bit, and it's nice to know. But that pull's in my body. It's literally in my body. It's either in my gut or somewhere. It's a feeling I have in my body. So the body is extremely useful in this life. And we talk about the preciousness of having this human life to work through these things. And the body, to me, is critical. It's absolutely critical. So for someone, my wife is probably jumping up and down wherever she is. She's somewhere in the house, possibly listening to this. She's probably jumping up and down and going, wow, he finally gets it. Great. That's like, the other version of that story is, how, she ate, she thought she ate well for years and years and years. And I ate, Doritos and all these kinds of things. And then I started to, in my 50s, have trouble with my body. And, I adopted a different diet. And then, of course, once I adopted the diet, everybody had to hear all about what I learned. And one of her friends came over one day and said, oh, my God, you've been eating good for all these years, and couldn't convince him at all, to even approach any of these good eating habits. All now, of course, he's got it, and we won't hear the end of it. That was like kind of a joke. But she's been a proponent of this idea that, she really uses her body as an instrument to tell her when she's feeling stress or when she's feeling some kind of something's coming up that's not comfortable or that she should be aware of or mindful of. And so to me, the body, again, it's really arisen to be something extremely valuable for working on this kind of stuff in Buddhism. Another thing that comes up is around the hindrances to meditation. It ties back to right effort, but all the effort to cultivate wholesome thoughts, speech, actions, abandon or avoid unwholesome states of mind are important to achieving the meditative states that are described by the Buddha, and we'll see some of those in the next element here, which is going to be, I believe, right concentration. So finally, we're at the end. We're almost at the end. In case you were wondering, there are 8 of these, and we're at the 8th one. We're still under concentration, and now we're getting kind of to the heart of the matter with regard to concentration. And literally, this has to do with the way it seems the Buddha described this particular element of the Eightfold Path is literally in terms of meditation, sitting meditation, and the concentration that we develop through it. It turns out, so this is called right concentration. It turns out that this concentration is extremely useful off the pillow as well. And that the things we notice in meditation and the subtle states of awareness that we develop there are extremely useful to carry out into the world. And as we're able to be quieter and quieter, as a person walking around in the world off the pillow, this concentration really comes to bear. And can we maintain a certain state of being, around other people? Can we manage not to sort of take too much when we're around other people? Can be aware of our speech and actions and what they do to others. And of course, we have to have a certain amount of experience to have more and more of that to sort of help us when we want to do that. But so experiential. This is an experiential path, and the pinnacle of sort of developing this concentration, the ability to see what's actually going on and apply the mindfulness of the other elements of the Eightfold Path is concentration. And so what he says here, and he says, well, in what bhikkhus is right concentration? Here, bhikkhus secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a bhikkhu enters and dwells in the first jhana, which is accompanied by thought and examination with rapture and happiness born of seclusion. So it seems like this first stage is, just secluding ourselves from the world and allowing our minds to settle down. The approach being through thought and examination initially, mindfully, examining, what's happening, being aware of it, but not attaching to it. And that practice, leads to a certain, rapture or happiness, born that's born of the fact that we've secluded ourselves to do this. And then the second one is the subsiding of. So with the subsiding of thought and examination, now we're moving on, right? So we've achieved that first state. He says he enters and dwells in the second jhana, which has internal confidence in unification of mind potentially with the body, right? Unification of mind is without thought and examination and has rapture and happiness born of concentration. And then going further, with the fading away as well of rapture, he dwells equanimous, mindful and clearly comprehending. He experiences, remember that, to me, it's a reminder as I'm going through these that, each of the different states we experience, and when we initially get quiet in meditation and we feel that, that really settled feeling, that real comfortable feeling, we can get attached to that. We can look for that every single time. That becomes a hindrance, right, to achieving that state. So there's this practice, this is a habit that we have of attaching to everything that we like, and being averse to the things we don't like. And so what he's describing here by degrees is how we get from, that initial state of where it's about rapture and happiness to one in the third jhana where it's like, it's not so much about that anymore. That stuff is there, but it's not the focus. We've moved beyond that now, and we're equanimous. We're mindful and clearly comprehending. He experiences happiness with the body. He enters and dwells in the third jhana, of which the noble ones declare he is equanimous, mindful, one who dwells happily. And then the fourth, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain. And there is such a thing, and we practiced. We studied meditation with in the sangha. It was the year before last. We literally spent the whole year. We used a certain book by Ajahn Chah called Mindfulness, Bliss, and Beyond. And he gave a way to practice meditation that led to the experience of the jhanas. And I remember as we were practicing during that time that this idea that we can get beyond our bodies, that we can be sitting in meditation, and the first thing that is a problem when we first try to sit for meditation is the body. It's not comfortable. we've got something going on, sciatica, our foot falls asleep. We're aware of all this stuff, right? And so, first make the body comfortable. And then as we begin to work with it, we begin to realize, oh, you know what? I can get quiet in my mind. And actually, I was not even aware of my body anymore. So this is possible, that we can actually experience this. So he says here, abandoning pleasure and pain. With the previous passing away of joy and displeasure, he enters and dwells in the fourth jhana, which is neither painful nor pleasant, and includes the purification of mindfulness by equanimity. He's not moved, right? It's not engaging in anything that might come up. Things might still come up, but he is in a state now where it's almost not even possible to engage. This is called right concentration, the fourth jhana, which is neither painful nor pleasant. So we're beyond these ideas that things need to be either painful or pleasant. It includes the purification of mindfulness by equanimity. Equanimity is literally that it's not painful. We're not judging these things. We're not applying these distinctions to them anymore. We've gotten beyond that. And what he's pointing out is that there's a way to do that. And then the usefulness of that as we go back out into the world, having seen, and then realizing, oh, well, I have this pain right now, but it doesn't have to be the thing that ruins my day, right? Because I know from my sitting meditation that I can actually get beyond my body, which is by the time I come up, out of my meditation, my legs are completely asleep. But I was just not aware of it. I was able to get to a place that I'm not aware of it. So sitting is like this concentrated laboratory when we sit for meditation of kind of experiencing that, this mind that we have is much more vast than just letting it run on with the kind of the dialogue chatter that we normally associate with our waking consciousness. And so then, that begins to inform how we start to see the world when we get up off of the pillow and go out to start our day. So I think with that, that's what I had to share today. I thank you for listening. I hope this was useful. Like I said, I kind of took the opportunity to say, geez, I don't really go into the suttas very much. And there's this Eightfold Path, there's this Four Noble Truths, and beyond whatever I've heard in the Dharma talk and whatever's been kind of fed to me, I haven't really looked into this for myself. So maybe I'll take this opportunity to do that. And I hope by sharing my experience of it, that was useful to you. So with that, we'll end. And I thank you very much for your time today.